Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, a ridiculous corrupt homeowner association stole 1,000 acres from a farmer and took over his farmland. The farmer never joined the HOA and he sues the hell out of this entitled HOA president. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. So my cousin is a farmer in Venezuela and some crazy stuff went down with the group actually getting him imprisoned just to take his land. For a little backstory, my family all grew up in Venezuela, but my parents immigrated to America when I was about 8, which of course meant I went with them. My uncle and cousins all stayed though, and when he was describing to me what this group was doing to him and acting like, I swear that it was almost like a super corrupt HOA. I tried to see if he knew what HOA meant, but he didn't, so I know that it is not actually an HOA. And Ripe Stars, I think by that the author means that HOAs probably don't really exist in Venezuela, but this was pretty much an equivalent. Either way, for this story I need to call it something though, so we will go with that. These people were horrible and did anything they wanted to the farmers living in the area, with seemingly no way to be stopped. My cousin would complain about them constantly, trying to make him follow their rules despite the fact that he had never signed up as part of the group. There were probably a ton of things that he never told me about them, but he called me one day to complain. My cousin, these people are really making me angry. Me, what did they do this time? At this point I was used to him telling me how they did things like try and extort money from him, wanting a percentage of his profit or wanting control of how he ran the farm. My cousin, they tried telling me that they want my land and they have the right to buy it. They were offering me next to nothing and making it seem like it was a done deal. I'm not selling the farm and giving it to these a-holes. Me, they are delusional if they really think they can get away with this crap forever. He told me another story about them forcing another farmer out of his property despite not being part of that HOA type group either. They really do anything they want, and at this point I did not know exactly how they were getting away with it. All that was about to change because of what they had done next. I did not hear from my cousin for a while and got extremely concerned. I contacted other family members and they looked into his whereabouts. When they told me that he was in jail, I started asking a million questions about what happened. It took a while of back and forth before I get the story of how he ended up imprisoned. He refused to sell his land to that HOA group and went as far as insulting them. They obviously did not like that and told him again to sell them the land because it is the rules of the HOA. He pointed out to them that he never joined that group and was not under their control. Then said some very nasty things to them that caused them to get furious with my cousin. That was when I learned the HOA was able to get away with things because they had connections. They used money to bribe people in power like city officials, police and even judges. With all that corruption, they were able to get away with anything they wanted and not face the consequences. They simply told the police they paid off to have my cousin imprisoned by any means needed. They came to get him and claimed that he was living on stolen land, and the next thing he knew, he was in jail. He did go to court, but it didn't help with them also being paid off. With him gone, the HOA stole all 1,000 acres of his farm and started to destroy it. They were digging up the land for building while destroying his fields. They sold off all his animals and pocketed the money for themselves. Now that I knew where my cousin was and why I put everything on hold in order to help him. While he might not have a lot of money being a farmer, I make more than enough to get him a good lawyer. I went down there and along with my cousin filed a lawsuit against this HOA group for stealing his land and imprisoning him with no just cause. I even managed to get him out of prison until his trial, arguing that it was corruption that put him there in the first place. The hardest part of the entire lawsuit was trying to find somebody impartial to judge the case. We went through investigating 3 before we finally found one that the HOA did not seem to pay off to look the other way. We filed the lawsuit against them and within, the entire thing exposed every dirty little secret the HOA had. How they managed to steal his land and were in the process of destroying it as we fought to get it back. Pointing out that my cousin was not part of the HOA, so he did not need to follow their rules and guidelines. We also made a point of the fact that legally, he cannot be forced to sell anybody his land if he doesn't want to. Finally, we started exposing issues with the arrest itself and how we found connections of the HOA, giving those police officers money in order to arrest my cousin for the crime he didn't actually commit. The judge was convinced and the HOA was ordered to evacuate the land and that my cousin was the true owner of the property. Also, that the HOA would need to compensate for the damage they did by giving my cousin money. Also, of course, my cousin was told that he was free and would not be returned to jail. The phony charges against him were dropped, and after 3 months of this crap he could finally return home. He could not just pretend like it never happened though and allow the HOA to keep running and ruining people's lives. He had seen others be destroyed by them and was finally done, and he wanted to get some revenge. He had all this information from the court, so he decided to make things very public. He called out not only the HOA but every city official and police officer that he knew was on their payroll. That news spread like crazy, and there was no choice but for an internal investigation. About 24 people lost their jobs for being corrupt and taking money from the HOA to let things slide. The HOA leaders also had a deep dive, looked into them, and could see all the criminal activity. Now, with all the people that turned their back on the HOA, they were finally be able to be brought to justice. My cousin could not stop smiling when he told me the HOA leaders were taken away and being sent to prison. It was their turn to be locked up, but the only difference was that they deserved it. He managed to use the money he won to partially fix the farm at least. I would have been more angry about it, but he came off as fine and happy despite the damage done. I think he was just happy that they were gone and he could breathe again without somebody over his shoulder harassing him. Regardless, things have calmed down for him and the farm is doing great, and the neighborhood is actually way better off now that the HOA people are in jail and cannot extort and put people in jail for no reason anymore. And yeah, Ripe Stars, if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even drop a comment, because that would help me tremendously. And by the way, if you haven't already, please check out my podcast where you will find exclusive Ripe Stories and early access to new episodes. Just search for Ripe Stories on Spotify and you will find me. Either way, the next one is titled Landlord Revenge. So this happened a while ago after I relocated to a new city. I signed a new 1-year lease for a townhouse in the downtown core and really enjoyed where I lived. The townhouse was okay, but a little less nice than I anticipated during my showing. Caveat emptor, I suppose. The only other relevant background is the lease said the security deposit would be used for the last month's rent and would not be held as a damaged deposit. The year passed with very few problems. The water heater went out in the dead of winter, but I stayed in a hotel for 3 nights and offset that cost against the rent after verbally agreeing with the landlord to do so. At the end of the year, the landlord asked if I wanted to renew. I said yes, and I was presented with a 1-year extension for the same rent. I signed it and sent it back. I waited about 2 weeks and had not received the landlord's signed version back, so I inquired with the management company. They said the landlord was mad because they didn't get rent on the first of the month most of the time. I asked what they were talking about because I always paid on or ahead of time, and they said that while I paid the management company on time as required by the lease, the management company had not gotten it into the landlord's hands in time. I said that was not my problem per the lease, but the management company requested $100 more per month on the extension to make up for the inconvenience. They said they would send me a new lease reflecting the $100 increase, which they did. I immediately went out and found a condo in a similarly ideal location, which was much nicer, that rented for $75 a month, less than my existing rent. I went through the background check with them and they sent me a lease to sign. Before signing the new lease, I sent a certified letter to the landlord and the management company of the old location saying my previous signature on the new lease, which had not yet been countersigned, was revoked and ineffective because of their counteroffer and no longer capable of acceptance. I then signed the new lease. At that point, I had about 10 days left on the existing lease. The management company and landlord called me freaking out because they would not be able to find a new tenant in time and would lose revenue. I said not my problem, hired a moving company, cleaned up the old place and returned it to them in the same condition I received it. And here, Ripe Stars, I'm curious, have you ever gotten any sort of malicious compliance or revenge in real life? Honestly, I cannot really remember of a single situation in which I inflicted malicious compliance on someone, but there are certainly some small, at least petty revenge stories. And speaking of revenge, the next one is titled Fence Revenge, and it starts like this. So I recently bought a house and have been having some work done before I move in. It was empty on the market for about 6 or 8 months before I bought it. So one morning I got a call from my contractor asking me about moving the cars in the driveway, and of course I had no idea what he was talking about. I hadn't moved in yet, I left my job site and drove nearly half an hour to get there. As soon as I arrived, the people on the east side of me were walking towards the cars. I asked if they were their cars and they said yes. They told me that they'd been parking there for a few months with permission from the owners. I informed them that I was the new owner and they cannot park there any longer. We went back and forth, and with the intention of being a good neighbor and trying to show some goodwill. I agreed to allow them to park there for a few more weeks until I move in, with the agreement that they would move them by 6 AM every morning. The rest of the week went by without incident. The contractor called me about scheduling a walkthrough on Saturday, and we set a time for early afternoon. When I arrived, there were 4 cars in the driveway and nowhere to park. The only on-street parking is 2 blocks away. I called them and asked them to move their vehicles, reminding them of our agreement. After 20 minutes, they finally came out and moved them. Speaking with them, they claimed to have misunderstood and thought our agreement only referred to weekdays and not weekends. I corrected them and moved on. Sunday morning, I grabbed a trailer and loaded some furniture to take over and store in the garage. Once again, there were cars in the driveway. I called them and got VM. I texted and said they had until a tow truck could arrive to get them moved. No answer. I called the tow company and 45 minutes later, 2 tow trucks showed up, backed in and hooked up to the cars. All of a sudden, the neighbors were home. They ran out to stop their cars from being towed, and it ended up costing them a little over $300 to get them unhooked. I called my contractor and asked if he knew someone who could put in a driveway gate, and he did. I let the neighbors know that they could no longer use my driveway. On Wednesday, I get a call from the gate installer telling me that there are cars in the driveway. I called them and said tow trucks are on the way, and they moved. The gate was installed and I went by to pick up the opener that evening. The neighbor husband came out to confront me and I opted to just call the PD and deal with it legally. That Saturday, I went by to accept an outdoor furniture delivery and check on things when I noticed a towel beside the pool and a small kid's flotation device. My initial thought was that I just hadn't noticed it before, so I wrote it off and threw them both in the trash. On Saturday, the movers arrived with everything and we began moving things in. About 7 PM, my daughters and I left to go grab some dinner, arriving back at the house around 9:30 PM. The neighbors were in my pool, they were hanging out and using my furniture. When I opened the door and began raising hell, they told the kids to go to the house and children ran to a corner of our fence and just walked through. They had cut out the privacy fence so it could be removed and had been using the pool at their leisure for who knows how long. Again, I called the police and filed a complaint. The dad was arrested for trespassing, DPP, and by the way guys, if you know what that means, please let me know in the comments because I did multiple Google searches and nothing came up. Anyway, and an outstanding warrant, and the oldest boy, 20 male, for an outstanding warrant too. I replaced the fence with a new one because they had destroyed the posts, runners and pickets by removing and reinstalling the panel. Small claims awarded me the total cost of 83 feet of 8 feet privacy fence, which came out to $3,800. The following Monday morning around 5 AM, their cars were parked in the street where there's no street parking, so I made a phone call. They were gone when I left at 7 AM. I have not been paid yet, but I did notice a for rent sign in their yard this morning, so that's just as good. Good riddance. Edit/update. For those of you suggesting a security system, one was installed that next week along with 6 cameras around the house, a Ring doorbell, and a fence around the pool itself to keep the dogs and my grandson out of it. I'll be closing and covering the pool in the next few weeks. Number 2, met the owner of the house yesterday evening. The house will be empty by the end of the week. They were evicted for non-payment of rent, likely due to tow charges and the husband not working because he was incarcerated where he remains. Warrant was for back child support. Wife apologized and claimed that she was told they had permission to use the pool, which they didn't. 3. The material for the fence was purchased through my company account. I'm a structural engineer and commercial construction manager for a large local GC. Only 2 posts had to be replaced and a handful of runners. The rest was just pressure-treated pickets, which cost me around $2.60 per stick, aka times 210 pickets purchased. The rest was labor and fasteners, so altogether about $900 for material and stain. $150 for a dumpster, and the rest went towards labor to finish it on a weekend. Fun fact, I'm also a property investor/flipper, been in construction, commercial, civil, industrial and residential for 35 years. Not my first fence nor my first a-hole neighbor. Before the paint experts jump on board, I know how long I have to wait before pressure washing and staining the fence. Number 4. The petty was only me twisting the knife by having their cars towed from the street when they were not affecting me at all. And the next one is an Am I the A-hole story. So my family and I moved into a new home this spring. We had previously lived in apartments and we now have our first yard for our kids to play in. The neighborhood we moved into has a lot of mature trees, and this being the first time I've had to do my own yard work, there has been a learning curve. One of my neighbor's yards is separated from ours by a chain link fence. There's a large tree just on their side of the fence. Some roots from the tree spread into my yard, and some of them are growing on the surface of the ground. They are visible and are above the ground quite a bit. About a month ago, my kids were running around and playing, and my daughter tripped on one of the roots, fell, and ended up breaking her wrist trying to catch herself. Of course, this was very upsetting to my wife and I, and she pretty much told me to do something about the roots so this didn't happen again. So then I bought some tools and started tearing the roots up as best I could. I got them out to a point that nothing is sticking above the ground anymore and filled the top in with fresh soil and grass seed. My neighbor must have noticed the work I did because he made a comment about the fresh soil. I told him that I had to remove some roots since my daughter tripped on one. He asked what I meant by remove, and I told him I dug a bunch out and cut them out as best I could. He got pissed and told me that I probably killed his tree. I told him that removing a few roots is not gonna hurt a tree that big, and they were creating a tripping hazard. And since they were in my yard, I did what I needed to do to remove them, and he told me there are other ways to deal with roots like that. Instead of cutting them out and causing stress to the tree, he would have gladly helped if I had asked. He said that tree is probably gonna die, which means it's probably going to have to be removed, and said that a tree that large is gonna cost thousands of dollars to take out. I told him that sounds ridiculously expensive, and he said if the tree dies and he has to have it cut down, he's going to ask me to pay for some of it because of what I did to the roots. I told him good luck with that and that I'm not paying anything for his tree. He called me an a-hole and told me the previous neighbors at least had the decency to ask for help when they didn't know what the hell they were doing, instead of causing damage to other people's property. I told my wife about it and she thinks the guy's just being a jerk and agrees with me that taking a few roots from the top of the ground is not gonna hurt a tree that big. She also agrees that there's no way in hell we are going to pay for anything for this guy's tree. We were just making sure our yard is safe for our kids to play in, so it's not our fault that his tree grew roots into our yard. And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know what you think about this in the comments. Do you think that OP is the a-hole or not? Comment number 1, you are the a-hole. You should have told him what you were doing since it is his tree. And yes, even though the roots were on your side of the fence, it's the neighborly thing to do. And speaking as someone with a fair amount of experience with plants, depending on what kind of roots you hacked away, how many there were, and what you did to the open wounds before covering with dirt, there's a chance you could kill the tree. Comment number 2, sorry, but you're the a-hole. You probably didn't know this, but if you damage his tree by cutting the roots, you are liable for the tree if it dies. You definitely should have spoken to him before cutting the roots. We did a ton of work in our very old property. The trees in my neighbor's property close to our boundary died, possibly as a result of the work we did. Our family lawyer advised us to pay to have the trees removed. It was not contentious and we are friendly with the neighbors, but it was the right thing to do. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Neighbor invaded my property and killed my landmark tree. $200,000 tree law revenge. For this, I'm just going to need to take a second to explain that where I live, there are a lot of trees that are considered landmark trees. This protects them from being destroyed because they are important to the environment here. Around here, there are a lot of small slopes and a ton of rain. All of this combined, the trees become needed for runoff and to keep the ground from eroding. I never fully understood what that means because I was never that good in science, but from what I understand, it means that you cannot cut down healthy trees because they protect the ground from being destroyed. Someone can comment and tell me if I didn't understand that right, but the point stands because they are labeled as landmark trees. Now, when it comes to my neighbor, he has a very loose definition of private property, and I have caught him more than once coming onto my land and trying to make adjustments for the greater good. Even though sometimes it can actually be helpful, like when he wants weeds pulled that are close to where the properties meet, I discourage this because I don't want him to think that it is okay to come onto my land and change things. After all, it is my property, and I told him if he has a problem or even a suggestion to just talk to me and I will take it under consideration. Until this incident, I never really saw him as crazy, just maybe a little bit eccentric. Then he started going on about this tree that was on my property. He claimed that it was blocking his view and causing extreme shade on his property that was killing his flowers. Why he chose to plant there instead of parts of his backyard that I know for a fact have sun, I will never know. I flat out told him that even if I wanted to get rid of the tree, I could not because it was considered a landmark. And even if it wasn't, I liked that tree and was not going to cut down a perfectly healthy tree just so he could get a better view. And by the way, Ripe Stars, imagine having the audacity to just want to cut a super old tree down simply because you want a better view. Really unbelievable. Either way, I am a strong advocate for stopping cutting down healthy trees because they are important, and without them we might have sun, but we would not have oxygen that we need to breathe. I assumed that he would accept what I told him and move on to something else. Instead though, he got fixated about the tree, and every single time he saw me, he would make sure to ask if I made a date to get it cut down or if I needed a hand with it. I told him that the tree was staying right where it was and the only part coming off of the tree would be if a branch was dead. I don't know what he was hearing coming out of my mouth, but I feel like it might have been something else entirely. That was when the neighbor decided that he was going to take matters into his own hands. I woke up and heard a chainsaw going, but did not put two and two together right away. It was not until I came outside and saw that the tree was basically just a bunch of cut up logs on my property and a stump that I realized what he had done. I had caught him in the act too, holding the chainsaw and smiling like he was so smart and proud for what he did. Then he had the nerve to tell me that I should clean up the logs and get rid of the stump because it was an eyesore. As he went back to his property, he walked right through a hole in my fence that I can see he clearly also chainsawed his way through. I was furious and felt no remorse in calling to report him for trespassing and destruction of my private property / a landmark tree. I was also seeking money to pay for someone to come and clean up the yard and stumps because there was no way in hell I was going to pay a penny for his mayhem. I was not worried because I had tree law on my side, and after a few instances in my area, they seemed to be really strict and not letting people get away with things like this. We were both asked multiple questions like if the tree had died and it was standing, was it a danger to the homes, etc. Also, if the tree was unstable and had an evaluated risk of falling over and eventually needed to be removed. My neighbor had no way to prove there was anything wrong with the tree because, well, there wasn't. His excuse of it, killing his flowers, did not hold up. First, I'm going to talk about what they said about the tree and the law regarding that. For cutting down a landmark tree, he was going to have to pay triple what the estimated cost of the tree was. I did not get to keep all this money though, because it was going to be used by the town to plant a new tree that is considered equal to the one that was lost on my property. Since it is a landmark, they handle all of that even though it is on my property. I had no objections to that, of course, making things much easier. The leftover money was mine to use, and while there was no actual law, the judge heavily implied that I needed to use it to clear the land that the old tree stood on and make sure there is a space for the new one. That meant though that I could not really sue him for money to clean it up because that was part of what he had to pay. Either way, at the end for the tree, he had to pay the courts $200,000 for cutting down the landmark tree. He was flabbergasted to say the least. As for the trespassing and destruction of my fence, he was only given a warning about trespassing on my property. I never bothered trying to get a restraining order or anything like that I have read people doing because I could tell by his face that he was not going to try and do this again. The fence, he was told, he had to fix within 90 days and somebody would be coming to inspect and make sure that it is replaced. That was good enough for me because I was still trying not to laugh at his face from when they told him that he was going to owe for destroying a landmark tree. It really did serve him right because even if he did not personally know about the law, I flat out told him multiple times. From what I heard, he took out a second mortgage on the home in order to get the money to pay for everything. The new tree was planted close to where the old one was, so after all of that, he still ended up with that part of his yard being in the shade of the tree. While I did not get to keep much of the money at the end of the day, I did end up buying a small security system to keep an eye on my yard and know if he ever decides to trespass again. That way I have proof, and he might actually go to jail if he ever recovers from the shock and goes back to his old ways. I did not care about getting a big payday though, and was happier that I got a tree back at the end of it all. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.